I'm so excited that you took the time to join us on the next episode of Beyond the Culture. This is the show where we embrace change and challenge cultural norms and ideals. I'm your host, Dr. David Walker. So how are you today?
I'm doing wonderful, Dr. Walker. How are you?
I am doing well, and I am thankful for you being on the show today. But before we get into our conversation, I want to give you your official introduction. Today on Beyond the Culture, I have Attorney Nkechi Taifa. Attorney Taifa is the president and CEO of the Taifa Group, a social enterprise firm whose mission is to advance justice. She also convenes the Justice Roundtable, an advocacy coalition advancing progressive justice system transformation. Attorney Taifa received her Juris Doctorate from George Washington University Law School, and she is a proud member of the great Howard University. Attorney Taifa is the author of Black Power, Black Lawyer, My Audacious Quest for Justice, and we're definitely going to talk about your book today. She's also the published author of several classic books for children. She's written numerous scholarly works, including law review articles, book chapters, and white pages. And I am super excited today to have on our show, Beyond the Culture, Attorney Nkechi Taifa. Welcome, Attorney Taifa.
Welcome. Glad to be with you. This has been an auspicious week, I must say. Lord have mercy.
Yes. Yeah. And you know, since you said that about this week, I'm going to assume that you may have been speaking about the George Floyd trial with the Derek Chauvin, who we know that as of this recording, he was convicted on all counts on what he did in terms of having the knee on the neck with George Floyd. And then, of course, there are many other social justice issues that's taking place in our community. So being an attorney, speak to those issues as we start this conversation. Give us your opinion about the trial and how did you see it? Because I just want to say one more thing before you do. I noticed that one of the key pieces of evidence, and I was listening to DA Marilyn Mobley, I believe her name is from DA, yeah. from Baltimore. And she said the one thing that she did not have that the George Floyd case had was the video. And she said that was the difference. There were eyewitnesses, but the video made it conclusive for that jury. Give us your opinion about the trial.
So I would say she's right about that in one sense, but in another sense, not quite.
Okay.
We had a video with Rodney King. Okay. We had a video with Philando Castile. I mean, sometimes we have had videos and we still have not had convictions, but she is right. That video was the main linchpin, but I say there were twin linchpins. The other one was the crumbling and tumbling down of that infamous blue wall of silence. We had a phalanx of upper echelon police officials coming to court to testify on the stand against one of their own. Now, usually when you see police officers in court, and I'm a defense attorney, they be what we call test the lion, okay?
Okay, yeah.
We had police officers, upper echelon, testifying that you can see and believe what you saw with your own eyes. And I think that made a critical difference, you know, and, you know, the defense did, you know, I think they ought to be shamed.
Right.
They put George Floyd on trial as opposed to the person that they were representing, Derek Chauvin.
Right.
They put the innocent bystander witnesses, children, on trial as opposed to the knee on your neck killer cop, Derek Chauvin. They put the MMA specialists on trial. They put their own police, you know, folk who answer the phones and all that kind of stuff.
Yes.
You know, on trial. They put George Floyd and his addiction on trial. They even put the car's combustible stuff on everything on trial. They put as opposed to Derek Chauvin, the
Right.
real guilty culprit in the whole scenario. But I think the whole scenario has shown us that it's a new day.
Okay.
Okay. And as Sam Cooke said, our change is going to come. Okay. And I think that if there weren't the massive outcry of people out there on the streets, the protests for over a year, I'm not quite sure. I mean, there would really be an issue in my mind as to whether the verdict would have shown up the way it did, despite the video, even despite the failings of police officers. So all of these factors combined, what we call the totality of the circumstances, resulted in the conviction of Derek Chauvin. It's not over yet. He gets to appeal. It's not over yet. The sentencing has not happened. It's not over yet. There are 3 more police officers who should be tried. But the last thing I would say about this is one bad apple has been held accountable, but we must never forget that the whole daggone apple tree is rotten to the core, and it needs to be rooted out, and it needs to be recultivated with new values and new vision for just what public safety and just what, true justice can and should be.
That is such a true statement that sometimes a tree can be rotten and we have to change things even in a greater way. And this is just the beginning. But as we move forward, I want to go back just a little bit into your background. I know that you grew up in the 50s and the 60s.
Yeah.
And I heard you talk about your experiences with the Emmett Till situation. And then you also spoke about the experience that you understood about Fannie Lou Hamer. So you're a 50s and 60s person. Take us back then. Just kind of give us that little bit of the experience about how you grew up in that time and what you were going through and experiencing.
Yeah, so I actually was born the year of the infamous Brown versus Board of Education decision, 1954. Actually, it was just 2 days before 1955, but I always claim 54. Of course, I didn't know it at the time, but that was just several months before Emmett Till's body was found at the bottom of Mississippi's Tallahatchie River. I'm in 3rd grade when Fannie Lou Hamer is beaten to within an inch of her life simply for just trying to register to vote. I didn't know about these things growing up. I mean, your parents showed you from this and that, ABC, 1, 2, 3. Grew up in the typical, I would say, middle class background, middle class for Black folk, that is. There's a big difference between middle class for Black folk and middle class for white folk. Found that out, but it wasn't until I'm in junior high school and Black Studies is coming into the class. And I know, Dr. Walker, you're an educator. Black Studies coming into the class in the late 60s as a result, again, of the unrest that was going on in the streets and the like, and the Black is beautiful and all of that. I kind of was swept up in a whole lot of that. And I remember really wanting to take the Black Studies class in my junior high school class. And I don't remember much about that class or what we learned, but I do remember this poster on the bulletin board. And it was the poster of a Black man with a Black beret on his head, with a spear in one hand and a rifle in the other hand, sitting in a Grand Slam wicker chair. And all the teenage girls in my class were talking about how fine this brother was. But I kept asking teacher, well, why is he in jail? And why is the head of the Black Panther Party, Huey P. Newton, being represented by white attorneys? I'm asking, where are the Black lawyers to represent Black people? And from that moment, I knew that I wanted to be one of those Black lawyers. I wanted to be a lawyer that would be part of the struggle, part of helping to represent people who were standing up, for justice and what is right. And so I'm really coming of age at the end of like the civil rights era. Martin Luther King had just been assassinated. Malcolm X had been killed a number of years earlier. So I grew up in the kind of Malcolm X type of mode, by any means necessary. And that is what kind of moved and grooved me in the red, black, and green, and, you know, all of those sorts of things. And those, all of those revelations kind of stayed with me throughout my life, which is why I called my book Black Power, Black Lawyer, because I was imbued with the whole spirit of Black Power. And one of the things that I saw as time went on is that that was a movement that was largely swept under the rug. I mean, we would hear about the civil rights movement and all, but we didn't hear about a lot of the people that really influenced me and gave me inspiration. They were kind of like erased from the history books.
So are you talking about the Black Panther movement, or
not necessarily Black Panthers?
Okay.
The Black Panthers, because they were so much out there in the newspapers and all like that, people knew about the Panthers. Now, they knew about the Panthers through the lens of what the United States government wanted them to know about the Panthers, what the Federal Bureau of Investigation through J. Edgar Hoover and their secret legal program, COINTELPRO, to try to disrupt and destroy, you know, the movement. They know it through that angle. It's only until recently, you know, 50 years later, that people see movies such as Judas and the Black Messiah, that they say that, well, there's another view of the Black Panther Party, meaning free breakfast programs, you know, for children, and nefarious government forces surveilling and all like that. But that wasn't that wasn't the general narrative at that time. At that time, it was just gun-toting, you know, crazy Black folk.
Right.
But it was far from that. Okay. And which is one of the reasons why, I know you mentioned in my intro, I've written a couple of books for young people. This is eons ago, back in the early 80s, late 70s, early 80s. And it was about famous Black heroes and heroines, because we didn't have all that growing up. Okay. And I wanted young people not to have to stumble upon their history, you know, like I did, not to have to look through a book in your family's library called A Pictorial History of the Negro in America and see that image of Emmett Till there, so that these will be taught to them. And I focused on people like Malcolm X and Denmark Vesey and Harriet Tubman and Fannie Lou Hamer and Joseph Cinque and Paul Robeson and Marcus Garvey, folk who at that time was not part of the popular parlance of Martin Luther King and George Washington Carver and Frederick Douglass, some of the others that have been kind of like swept under the rug. So that's always been kind of what my life has been about, trying to uplift and bring things from out of the cobwebs into the open.
Did you have an association with the Black Panther Party in their newspaper at all? I thought I might have read something about that. Tell us about that.
First of all, let's not get it twisted. I never was a card-carrying member of the Black Panther Party, if they even said card-carrying, whatever. But as a teenager, I used to go down to their office every single Saturday. I used to sell Black Panther papers every Saturday on streets in Washington, D.C. I used to participate in the public political education, PE classes. But most of all, I really like sitting on the lap of that fine brother pulling security in the front office. That really was my impetus for going down there every week. And I was in love with this brother. He didn't know I was in love. I mean, you know what I mean? A little teenage girl, me. But that was the allure, you know what I mean? But it wasn't just the allure, it was what they were all about. And they had a 10-point program. And that's when I first learned about the issue of reparations. And my eyes just really got big. And that is an issue that I have promoted from that time, age 16, all the way down to today, when I'm in my 60s. We won't say how old. But
well, listen. When you say you were born 1954, you already gave it away. I can count. But exactly. But let's move on. So you became a lawyer. You had this drive. You said you saw how Huey P. Newton was being represented by white men, probably. And
white men, progressive lawyers, radical lawyers. You know, they weren't.
Right. But it drove you to want to become a lawyer and I know that you worked on Capitol Hill as a lawyer. So just talk about that experience of working in Washington, D.C., being a lawyer, and the impact that you think that you've had as a lawyer.
All right. Well, um, the first day after I got my law license, I actually got arrested.
Wow.
Yeah, I got arrested in front of the South African embassy, calling for the release of Nelson Mandela from unjust imprisonment and calling for a free South Africa. Now, of course, the arrests were staged, um,
Hmm.
making sure that plastic cuffs would be used, making sure that charges were dismissed, but it was a statement, and it was a far cry from the type of arrest that John Lewis went through and
Okay.
all of the folk during the civil rights era. Far, 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 far from that. Far from the types of arrests that's going on now with Black Lives Matter folk and folk who are protesting, out there. But nevertheless, I felt it important to make statements. I was arrested several other times in similar fashion. The next time in front of the Congressional Longworth House Office Building in support of statehood for the District of Columbia. And just this week,
Yeah.
a DC statehood bill passed for the second time on the floor of the House of Representatives. I am a native Washingtonian and have not had the privilege of being able to have two senators that I
Right.
vote for, or a representative in Congress who had full voting rights. Never have had that opportunity. So I got arrested in support of that. Again, these aren't solitary arrests. I'm amongst a throng of people,
Sure.
Jesse Jackson and Dick Gregory and, all
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
that, wasn't like,
Sure. Yeah.
and then the third time was in front of the White House in Lafayette Square, protesting in support of democracy for Haiti. And actually, there was a fourth arrest. Now, that wasn't quite an arrest; it was a detainment. That one was not voluntary. I had gone to. I'm 5 months pregnant. Had gone to Grenada to participate in the wedding of a colleague, a good friend of mine. Came back to the United States through Puerto Rico, and I'm detained. And they're saying I'm on some list of people who have been to Libya.
Wow.
Now, I've been to many places, but I can assure you, I had never been to Libya. Now, I might have known some folk who had been there, but I had not. And,
Right.
they are detaining me, looking at some document or whatever. So that time was not, voluntary. But, having something to do probably with my name, with associations, all things that are totally and completely protected by the Constitution of the United States, or clients that I may have represented in the past. So as a lawyer, I have hung out my own shingle. I've worked for large organizations. I've escorted experts through prisons. I've litigated large-scale class action prisoner suits. I've represented in a David versus Goliath case. Black plaintiffs suing large mega media conglomerates, shall I say,
Uh-huh.
and been quite successful. But I decided, Dr. Walker, that after seeing a client, a juvenile client that I very successfully represented in terms of not allowing him to get caught up in the criminal legal system. After I'm seeing in the Post a couple of years later, he's running guns up and down the East Coast, I decided to go into policy as opposed to individual representation.
Okay.
And I had a niche. My policy niche was primarily criminal legal system, criminal justice reform. And so that's where, over the past, I guess you say 20 years, my legal efforts have been a focus, has been in the policy arena.
Now, I believe I read that it said that you are a Black Power advocate and a Black movement lawyer. So my question is, how do you see the system today as compared to yesterday? Growing up in your experience of yesterday, how do you see the racial justice system, um, the law? Is it different today? Is it a different experience, or do you see some of the same similar processes?
Well, it is the same and it is different.
Okay.
Sometimes the more things change, the more they remain the same. But in other instances, there has been advancements. When I say I went into the policy arena, I came in there smack in the middle of um, the omnibus crime bills that were proliferating in the early 90s after the pronouncement of the war on drugs by um, Nixon.
Okay.
And this proliferation of all of these policies, there were no difference between the Republicans and Democrats. Everybody was tough on crime.
Okay.
In fact, candidate Bill Clinton left the campaign trail to oversee the execution of a mentally challenged man in Arkansas. Because you cannot, in those days, you could not advance unless you were tougher than thou on crime. And what did that lead to? That led to what I call the granddaddy of all crime bills, the crime bill in 1994, which led to the largest expansion of the federal death penalty in modern times, the gutting of habeas corpus, the evisceration of the exclusionary rule, the trying of 13-year-olds as adults, the cutting out of Pell educational grants for prisoners, the institution of the federal 3 strikes law, the refusal to address the crack powder disparity, and 100,000 new cops on the street, which actually has led to what all the stuff that we see today, but a whole lot of money to states to build a whole lot more prisons, to lock up a whole lot of more Black folk. And that is what led to what we call the whole era of mass incarceration that we find ourselves in today. So what has changed, what is beginning to change, is that we're beginning to chip away on that tough on crime mentality, which is beginning to look at more, we need to be more smart on crime. We don't need to imprison people, warehouse them forever and throw away the key. Slowly but slowly, that's beginning to change. We need to look at police departments and the culture, the police culture, the police culture where as one goes down the police hierarchy, discretion increases, meaning the cop on the street, Derek Chauvin, has more discretion sometimes than the top person up top. You don't want that type of discretion, no matter how much so-called training, he's supposed to be the training officer that someone might have. You have to rein in that discretion, particularly since, in the words of the Oath Keepers, one of those ultra white supremacist terrorist groups, they say that we have thoroughly infiltrated law enforcement. That's what they said.
Yeah.
And we saw some of that on January 6th, the January 6th insurrection, at the Capitol. So what has changed? People are realizing that they're not going to take this anymore. That's what led to all of the protests in the streets. It's a sad commentary, however, Doc. It's a sad commentary that we have moved from the pinnacle of my coming of age years, the pinnacle of Black power, to just the minimalist expression to just let our lives matter. I mean, that's a sad commentary.
Yeah.
We go from Black power to just let me breathe.
Yeah.
That says something in and of itself. We got a long way to go.
You are right. We do have a long way to go. I love what you said. The more things change, the more they stay the same, and that is true. But as you said, that people are stepping up and they're protesting. Although I know just recently here in Florida, as well as many other states around the country, they just signed into law anti-protest bills.
I could not believe it.
Can you believe that?
But not only that, I not only believe the anti-protest bills, anti-riot bills or whatever, they carved out some kind of exception. So if you bulldoze your car through a crowd of protesters, you won't be held liable. I said, what? I mean, that is something that actually passed. I mean, I'm just saying, we got a long way to go.
A long way to go. I guess we could put that right there next to not giving out water while people are standing in line to vote.
about the inhumanity of that. Arresting a public official who is only who is just knocking on a door.
Knocking on the door.
Knocking on a door to see these things being signed. I mean, you know what I'm saying? The audacity. What have we come to? I mean, I'm just saying, the more things change, the more they remain the same. This sounds like that Jim Crow era stuff, that enslavement era stuff, you know? But just, you know, suited down.
Exactly. You mentioned that when you were growing up, or your experiences with the Black Panther Party, they introduced you to a word called reparations.
Yeah.
And I know recently you were involved with the committee, and you're part of the National Coalition of Blacks for Reparations in America. And just last week, I know there was a Judiciary Committee vote, HR 40 Reparations Judiciary Committee Vote Forum. I know reparations was initiated back in, I think it was 1989, by Congressman John Conyers, and we're still having those conversations. And yourself, along with Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee, and of course another Howard. I know he's a professor. I don't know if he's an alum, Dr. Greg Carr. I'm not sure if he's an alum, but I know he's there. I know
he's head of the African
Studies
Department.
So I know he was involved, and as many other dignitaries. So there was a vote last week about HR 40. Tell us about that. Tell us about your involvement. How did the vote go, and where does it stand now?
Okay, thank you. I'm a founding member of NCOBA, the National Coalition of Blacks for Reparations in America, founded in 1987, around the time when the bill to grant reparations to Japanese Americans was being discussed and debated in Congress. That bill, called the Civil Liberties Act, passed in 1988. And that bill granted $20,000 to each Japanese American detention camp survivor, fund to be able to educate Americans about their sufferings during World War II, a formal apology from the United States government, and a pardon for all those who resisted detention camp internment. So we're looking around within NCOBA, National Coalition of Blacks for Reparations in America. We said, yeah, if they can do it for the Japanese Americans, there is no reason on God's earth that the same should not be done for us, despite the fact that folk have been demanding reparations ever since, from time immemorial, from the beginning. But it was at this time when we said we need some legislation. So we worked very closely with Congressman John Conyers in crafting the bill, and very strategically crafted it almost identical off of the bill that just passed Congress in terms of the bill for Japanese Americans. And it was named HR 40 in remembrance of the 48 of mule, that failed promise that was never actually actualized, that was promised to us at the end of the enslavement. In fact, you know, Doc, reparations were in fact paid at the end of the enslavement era. They just weren't paid to us.
To
they were
landowner.
They were paid to slaveholders for the loss of their so-called property. So that was in 1989, 32, 33, whatever years ago. It wasn't until, like you said, last week, or was it this week? It was, that the bill passed on the floor of the, that's not true, excuse me, passed out of committee. The next step is the floor. Judiciary Committee held what's called a markup on the bill, and it passed along the expected party line. Okay, and again, the next step is a vote on the floor, movement in the Senate, and there is always the option that President Biden could sign HR 40 into law as an executive order. Again, it's only a commission to study and develop the proposals for reparations. It does not grant one red cent. It does not change one policy or procedure. It establishes a commission to look at all of these things and make recommendations. Reparations is an issue whose time has come. There's never been as much momentum around the issue as there is today. You got colleges and universities, you got corporations and industries, you got organizations, you know, coming on board, supporting of reparations. When you have a corporation like Ben and Jerry's ice cream, as
Wow.
far attenuated from the issue of reparations that you could ever imagine, talking in support of reparations, when you have the Players Coalition of sports folk and coaches and all like that across, the sports stuff in support of reparations, when you have Amalgamated Bank, the largest union bank in the United States, in support of reparations, you know that there is a reckoning. When you have the Jesuits um, um, vowing to raise $100 million as part of their atonement for the 272 men, women, and children that they sold down the river to keep Georgetown University from going into bankruptcy.
Mm.
When you have the Episcopal Church, dioceses of them talking about reparations, the Princeton and Virginia Theological Seminary, I'm just saying, this is the time. And,
This is the
I was a
time.
teenager when I first started talking about this issue. I'm an elder now. Let's hope it happens in my lifetime.
I know it hasn't been decided yet, but in your opinion, do you see it just as a monetary payment or inclusive of an apology? What do you see in terms of what the reparations should be?
Well, let me just say this, first of all. It's a sad, sad commentary on the United States that there has never even been an official, unfettered apology for what's going on. Now, I will say in 2008, I think it was, the House passed an apology bill. The Senate passed an apology bill, but the Senate's bill said you cannot use our apology as any type of justification for reparations. So it never became law, and it was never something that was signed. In my humble opinion, the harms of the enslavement era that linger down through today were multifaceted. Thus, the remedies must be multifaceted as well. I would never be the person to say there should never be monetary compensation. Anytime where there's a harm, there is a remedy, there's redress, and always monetary compensation is part of that. But that is not the end with all. A reparation settlement, again, can and should be as broad as is possible to begin to rectify and allow healing. It could be monuments, it can be educational textbooks, it can be policies and procedures. It can be pardons for those who resisted the war of COINTELPRO and is still languishing in prisons and jails. It can be measures to close the Black-white health gap. It can be procedures and all to deal with the issue of redlining that was going on, in this country. We didn't get any benefits from the GI Bill and
Right.
all of that. All of these things are things that the commission can and should look at when coming up with some type of different proposals. It can be land, it can be repatriation, resources. It can be whatever we come up with that we decide, okay, that we present and that the commission presents to Congress for enactment.
One of the last things that I want to talk with you about is your book.
Yeah.
It's entitled Black Power, Black Lawyer, My Audacious Quest for Justice. Yes, and there's a picture of it. Tell us about your book and why did you write it?
Yes, thank you so very much. Well, I consider my book, I call it part memoir, part textbook, part study guide, and part expose. I say that it teaches, it preaches, it rhapsodizes, and it tantalizes. But whether serious or scandalous, it is an authentic rendition of my life. I sought to uplift people that moved and grooved me, that inspired me, people that you don't read about in the history books, names that you can't even pronounce, like Imari Abubakar Obadali, or Chokwe Lumumba, or Kwame Afo, or Queen Mother Audley Moore. I'm just saying, icons, okay,
Sure.
legendary icons who are now ancestors who really left their mark on society. Dr. Francis Cress Welsing, Dr. Jean Sindeb, Shaka Musa Barashango. I tell of these are people that I dedicated my book to, as well. And I didn't want people's memories to be swept under the rug. I wanted there to be knowledge that there were other movements that were out there other than the ones that you read about in the books. One movement in particular, what is called the New African Independence Movement, the anti-apartheid movement. I mean, we hear a lot about that, but I lived through that movement. I lived through those movements, the reparations movement, the movement to free political prisoners, and now the movement against mass incarceration. I touch on all of these movements in my memoir, Black Power, Black Lawyer.
How can we get your book, and where is it? Where can we find it? And also, I do want you at this point to give us all of your social media, information, so we can stay in contact with you.
My book can be wherever books are sold, but particularly go to my website, www.blackpowerbblacklawyer.com. And there are a list of bookstores from the African American Literary Book Club, Taifa bookstores, just a list of Black bookstores you can get it from. But it's also, you can get it from the big boys, Amazon, Books, A Million, Barnes and Noble, and the list goes on. So it can be purchased there at blackpowerbblacklawyer.com. I'm on Twitter. My first name @Nkechi_Taifa. Okay, I'm on Facebook. My name, Nkechi Taifa. If you just, there ain't for so many Nkechi Taifas out there. If you just go, you gotta know how to spell it though. NKECHITAIFA. And it ends up, it comes up. But one of the things that I think I would like to say about the book, I was really honored to have endorsements for my book from, legendary folks such as the great iconic Angela Davis.
Wow.
From the actor extraordinaire Danny Glover. From the son of civil rights activist James Foreman, Professor James Foreman Jr. From the son of the Honorable Marcus Messiah Garvey, Julius Garvey Jr. From the daughter of Chokwe Lumumba, one of my legal mentors, ended up becoming mayor of Jackson, Mississippi. His son still now holds that position. His daughter and his sister, Rukia Lumumba, wrote a blurb on the back of my book. My favorite poet, well, I got both of them, Nikki Giovanni, wrote a blurb for my book, and Sonia Sanchez, as well. These are cultural and, political and literary icons from that whole era that moved and grew me so much.
Wow. I mean, what a list of people who have given a testimony about the great work that you've done. And Attorney Nkechi Taifa, I just want to take this moment to thank you for being on our show today. But before I go, because I do want to ask you this, and then I'm going to close, I just want you to leave us with one final message, and then I'll close out. Just a message of inspiration.
Well, I'll do the one that always inspires me. It comes from 1857 in the words of the great anti-slavery orator, Frederick Douglass. He said, if there is no struggle, there is no progress. Those who profess to favor freedom, yet depreciate agitation, are those who want the crops without plowing up the ground. They want the rain without the thunder and the lightning. They want the ocean without its mighty roars and all that. And he said that this struggle may be a physical one, or it may be mental, or it might be both physical and mental, but it's got to be a struggle. Because he said then, and it still stands firm today, he said, power concedes nothing without a demand. It never did, and it never will. And that's what I hope to have done with Black Power, Black Lawyer, to inspire that demand in us, in our people, to demand freedom, to demand, progress, to demand what is rightfully owed and just.
Attorney Nkechi Taifa, you have come on our show today, and you have inspired us, you have enriched us, you have informed us, you have enlightened us. And I am just super excited that you took this time out of your busy schedule just to join us and speak to this audience. And as I say to all of my guests who come on the show, you have gone beyond the culture, and I thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me, Dr. Walker.
All right, you take care.
You too.
Now, if you want to continue to hear inspiring interviews like the one you heard today, I want you to subscribe to this podcast on iTunes. Also, rate the show and please leave a comment. I would also love it if you would share this podcast with your friends to let them know that we're on. Finally, please go to our website at www.beyondtheculturepodcast.com, or you can email me at beyondtheculturepodcast@gmail.com. On the website, you can subscribe to the show and connect with me by leaving your email address. I'd love to hear from you. This is your host, Dr. David Walker, and we'll talk again on Beyond the Culture. Take care.